Hello everyone. In today's session, we are going to explore the classification of mental disorders. Before we dive in, let's think about why we even need to classify abnormal behavior or mental disorders. This idea actually comes from the field of medical science, specifically from the taxonomy of disease. It's essentially an attempt to give names to illness based on their symptoms. The purpose is to make disease more objective so they can be treated in a systemic way. After all, once something has a name, it becomes a recognized entity in our mental framework. Naming a disorder makes it easier to accumulate knowledge about it, and it also allows professionals to communicate about it efficiently. For all this to work, the diagnostic system needs to be both reliable and valid. That means we should have empirically supported information on the causes, the progression, the key characteristics, and the treatment for each disorder. Unfortunately, in the case of abnormal psychology or mental disorders, achieving this is far from easy. If we take the common cold as an example, we can say it's caused by virus, and scientific advances can clearly identify the cause. But the human mind is still, in many ways, an uncharted territory. When we say someone is depressed, we can describe their symptoms or explain how depression might get worse or improve, and scholars can offer various theories. However, we cannot say with certainty that one single explanation is a correct one. Even though our knowledge is incomplete, we still try to classify mental disorders in many ways. Here we will look at two main diagnostic classification systems, the psychiatric system and psychodynamic system. In addition, the behavioral approach also has its own way of grouping abnormal behaviors. But remember, this is not really a diagnostic system. Let's go through each of these one by one. First, let's talk about the psychiatric diagnostic system. There are two main systems here, DSM and ICD. You may have heard of them before. DSM stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. In Korean, 정신장애의 진단 및 통계 편람. It is published by the American Psychiatric Association and is most widely used in the United States and Europe. Right now, the 50th edition DSM-5 is in use. Next, we have the ICD, which stands for International Classification of Diseases. It is read by the World Health Organization, WHO. In 2019, ICD-11 was approved, and since 2022, the 11th edition has been in use. If you want to learn more about the history of DSM, I have uploaded a paper by Professor Kim Chung-song to this site campus for you to read. Next, let's look at the psychodynamic diagnostic system. This is called Psychodynamic Diagnostic Manual, or PDM in short. It was created by experts who disagree with the DSM's way of classifying and diagnosing mental disorders. As the name shows, psychodynamic refers to the field of psychotherapy that uses psychodynamic or psychoanalytic approaches. Many organizations were involved in making this manual. Basically, most psychodynamic and psychoanalytic professionals in the US and internationally. I have provided two reference links for you. One is an article by Nancy McWilliams, a leading figure in psychodynamic psychology, explaining why they felt the need to create the PDM and how it is useful compared to DSM or ICD. The other is the website of the 현대 정신분석 연구소, which it introduced PDM and its use in psychotherapy in Korea. Please take a look at this if you are interested. Next, let's look at the behavioral classification system. Earlier, we talked about the DSM, ICD, and PDM. Those are diagnostic systems. They give a clear diagnosis, like you have major depression disorder or you have a panic disorder, and treatment, often with medication, is given accordingly. The behavioral classification system is different. It does not give a diagnosis. Instead, it simply groups abnormal behaviors based on types of behavior. In behavioral theory, abnormal behavior is seen as the result of faulty learning. It is classified into four main types. Behavioral deficit, a behavior that is normally expected in society, has not been learned or has been lost. Behavior excess, showing certain behavior much more often than is socially acceptable. And breakdown or distortion in the usual stimulus-response link. The normal connection between a stimulus and a response is broken or distorted. And appropriate reinforcement systems. Our behavior habits are shaped by reinforcement, reward, or punishment. In some cases, reinforcement patterns are abnormal, leading to maladaptive. Now, we have covered the basic idea of classifying abnormal psychology and mental disorders. From this slide onward, we'll focus on the DSM, the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is often called the common language of psychiatry. Let's first look at its history. The first edition of the DSM came out in 1952. At that time, it had only 8 categories and 106 diagnoses. Since then, it has been revised about every 10 years. The most recent edition is DSM-5, published in 2013. This version has 22 categories and about 350 diagnoses, roughly 3 times more than the first edition. Starting from the 5th edition, many changes were made. Earlier editions from DSM-2 to DSM-4 used multi-Excel system 다축 체계, but this was removed. Now the DSM include both categorical and dimensional approach. Here on the slide, you can see all 22 categories of mental disorder listed in the DSM-5 along with examples. I'm not going to read each one now. You can review the full list on your own. For this course, we will focus on 11 of these categories. These are the ones most relevant to abnormal psychology and most commonly encountered in clinical practice. In a few weeks, we will begin exploring these categories in depth, looking at their main symptoms, possible causes, and treatment approaches. Let's think about this. Among all these mental disorders, which one are the most common? We can find the answer in a national survey by 보건복지부. This survey was first conducted in 2001 and has been repeated over the years to track the prevalence of mental disorder in Korea. Prevalence means the number of people in a population who have a certain illness during a specific time period. Here, we look at the 1-year prevalence, 1년 유병률, the percentage of people who experience a mental disorder during that year. And lifetime prevalence, 평생 유병률, the percentage of people who have ever experienced a mental disorder at least once in their life. To measure mental disorders, the survey used a diagnostic tool called the CIDI, which was developed based on DSM-4 and ICD-10. If you look at the graph, in 2001, the 1-year prevalence was slightly higher for men. Over time, the gap between men and women decreased, and since 2011, the rate for men and women have been about the same. Next, let's look at the graph showing different types of mental disorders. Overall, the most common disorder is anxiety disorder. If we compare men and women, we can see women have a higher rate than men. Second is alcohol use, followed by nicotine use disorder in the third place. Both of these are much more common in men than women. The fourth is depression, depressive disorders, which like anxiety disorders are more common among women. Now let's take the lifetime prevalence. Overall, about 27.8% of people in Korea have experienced at least one mental disorder in their lifetime. That's roughly 1 in 4 people. By disorder type, alcohol use disorder 11.6, and nicotine use disorder 9.5, and anxiety disorder 9.3, and depressive disorder 7.7. So putting this all together, we can see the most common mental disorders we observe in every life are anxiety and depression. So today we explore abnormal psychology and the classification of mental disorders. We discussed why classification is necessary, the practice limitation it faces, and the diagnostic system that we currently have. We also took a brief look of the most widely used system, the DSM-5. In our next session, we will turn to the causes and treatment of mental disorders. Thank you for your attention.